Everyone, greetings from Berlin to all over the world. On behalf of Transparency International, Sunlight Foundation and the International Anti-Corruption Conference, I would like to welcome all of you to the third and the last session of our webinar series, which is looking at how people can use political finance data, what does it mean to them, and how can it be part of our everyday life. My name is Peter Taus, and I work in the People Engagement Program of Transparency International Secretariat. I'm supporting the advocacy and legal advice services in our movement, in which the community is providing support to the victims and witnesses of corruption. So we work with individual cases and stories. That's why our work is very, very close to the everyday life of people. And I think it is even more complex to turn the political finance information into tangible and meaningful message to reach every citizen and to demonstrate how lack of transparency affects them and what can they do. So before we talk about anything, I need to say again a big thank you to Julia and Amy from Sunlight Foundation who put together the concept of this webinar. And special greetings to our guest speaker, Camille, and of course to those who participated at the first or the second webinar as a participant or even a speaker, and decided to join us today as well. So welcome everyone, and let me briefly guide you through the platform. As a participant, you can comment and ask questions anytime in the chat box. And I would like to encourage all of you to use this actively and try to create live discussions. Today we will also have some polls and questionnaires, and of course a longer Q&A session, because this was also something that you suggested and recommended after the second webinar. So please put your provocative and challenging questions in the chat box. And my suggestion is to start right now with a very short introduction from each one of you who is here with us today. So each participant, please introduce yourself with one sentence in the chat box. Just put your name, organization, and if you have any specific expectation about the webinar, please write it down now, or just say hi. Just say hi to the others. Please also note that we are recording this webinar. Just consider this before you start to type something in the chat box. But I would like to encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat box. Okay, and now I have the privilege to introduce our speakers today. We have Amy, the Partnerships and Training Director from Sunlight Foundation, and Julia, who is the International Policy Manager from Sunlight Foundation. They are the heart of this webinar series, so probably most of you had a chance to already listen to them. And we have also a special guest today, Camille from Czech Republic, who is a data analyst from the organization called Kohovolit. So thank you very much for joining. I'm really excited, and now I give the floor to Julia, to Washington. Julia?
Hello everyone, welcome to our final webinar, and as Peter said, this is a bittersweet moment for us because this 3-series webinar was a great experiment, and we're sad that we have arrived to the final session. And let me grab this opportunity to say a very big thanks to Peter, who was basically behind the idea of organizing this webinar series. And of course, a big thanks for Transparency International and the International Anti-Corruption Conference for hosting this webinar series. Also a big thanks to our current and previous speakers who joined us from around the world. I hope that we'll get the chance to talk to some of them today too. And because as Peter said, today's agenda will be a bit different from the previous webinars' agendas, since we will have a bigger, longer session for Q&As. But before we go to the agenda and before we get to the meat of today's webinar, let me just very quickly recap on what we have touched base on in the first 2 webinars. In the first session, we have explored the stage and the level of disclosure on political finance information from around the world. And we also agreed on some basic definitions and what we mean by political funding transparency. And we also introduced some of the tools from the USA, Argentina, and Georgia that build on maybe not perfectly disclosed, but pretty nicely and appropriately published political funding data. And we also talked about how this information or the access to such kind of data improves the work of investigative journalists. We had a journalist from Sunlight's reporting team who talked about their experience with working with data. And then in the second webinar, we talked about situations where data is not available, and we know, based on our research, that this is the case for most countries. Data on party financing, party expenditures, or the funding and spending of election campaigns is mostly unavailable in almost all of the countries around the world. And so we talked about creative ways and innovative solutions that try to use other kinds of data sets, such as procurement data, subsidies, company registry information, data about NGOs and nonprofits. So we talked about those tools and projects that use different data sets or crowdsource the information or try to connect the dots and show the influence of money in politics in different ways. We introduced you projects from the USA, from Spain, from Hungary, and Kenya. And we also talked a little bit about how we can advocate for such data, what happens on the level of policymaking, and how we can convince our politicians to disclose that kind of data. And so today, I'm sorry, you can watch the archived version of both of our webinars at training.sunlightfoundation.com/TI-webinar. And today, as Peter said, we're going to talk about citizen engagement and how to increase civic participation when it comes to political finance information. And I must tell you honestly that when we put together the concept and the script for this webinar, we were desperately trying to find tools from outside the US, because we have a couple of tools developed by Sunlight, developed by other organizations who are based in the US, but not so much from other countries. And of course, part of the reason for that is probably the unavailability of such data. Still, we were amazed how much such kind of projects are missing in the open government space. So if you guys have any suggestions, if you know of any tools, projects that try to inject political finance information into the everyday life of every citizens, please type them in the chat box or let us know, because we're really interested to know. And I can see that we have a huge echo, which is weird because everyone is muted besides us. Okay, let us know if you want. Okay, cool. Okay, no echo. It is better now. Great. So again, as I said, we will talk about some of the tools from the US that inject political finance information into the everyday lives of citizens. We'll show you citizen engagement tools and how to make them relevant for people, because it's not enough to develop tools. You also have to get them to people. And we'll also show you some of the ways to build a community with networking, through networking with civic hackers, and developing crowdsourced projects that engage people in a different way. We'll also show you some of the innovative projects that governments and local governments are doing in this space. It is mostly local governments that we know of. Again, if you can think of any national governments that could be set as good examples, please let us know. We're really interested to know. And finally, as I've said, we'll have around 20 minutes for Q&As. We have prepared with some questions, but we really want you to raise your questions if you have any, and to think together about the next steps and what we can do to make this whole topic way more relevant to the people who are not us. So with that, let me give the floor to my colleague Amy, who will talk about some of the Sunlight developed tools and some other tools too from the US. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. This is Amy. I'm the Partnerships and Training Director here at Sunlight Foundation, and I just want to say good morning from Washington, D.C. So there are going to be a number of different tools and resources that I'm going to be showing off. And I just want to start off by recapping one of our first tools that we talked about. It's called Influence Explorer. And the reason why I want to recap this is because I want to show another tool that actually builds upon the data. And even though I'll be showing off a number of different tools, what we are trying to show here is not necessarily tools that you can replicate in your countries. I understand that the data that's available in each country is vastly different than what we have here in the United States. So it's really meant to inspire, as Julia said, and really just help you to start thinking about what are different ways you can inject what can be very boring topic of campaign finance into people's individuals' lives, even on a daily basis. So, like I said, the first tool I want to talk a little bit about is called Influence Explorer, and you can find it at influenceexplorer.com. And don't worry about copying all of these URLs right now, because the webinar will be archived. So the tool, what it does is connects the dots on public and private campaign finance and influence data. So we have a number of different data sets that are a part of this tool, from lobbying, like I said, campaign finance, and regulatory data, to contracts and environmental penalties, and also advisory committees to see who on specific companies on their boards sit on actually the agencies' boards and whatnot, and they're advising in the non-governmental capacity. And so you can search for people, organizations, politicians, etc. And it's better to just show you what it looks like. So you can look at the individual. So this is an example from Barack Obama. You can choose a different cycles that you're interested in exploring the data. And this one we're looking at 2011 to 2012. You can get a sense of the campaign finance spending in that cycle, as well as other summary campaign finance information, such as how much money did they raise from in-state and out-of-state, and how much money do they still have on hand, as well as contributions over time, and additional information about their independent expenditures. So like, are there groups that are opposed to this candidate, etc., and see their campaign finance spending. And the reason I want to show this is because it's a tool that actually powers another one of our resources here. It's called Polygraph. And what it does is allows you to either read stories, or you can type in the text of the URL, and once you hit submit, what it does, it will actually So I'll highlight all of the different entities that are in your story that also hits the Influence Explorer data. So, from candidates to here, this is a story from the Washington Post. The Washington Post is also an entity that, lobbies, provide a little bit more context. So now when you're reading a news story, you're not just reading the story, you're also seeing if there are additional influence points from these different individuals or entities. Tool that we built to really help empower individuals. And here in the US, ads. And there are ads that are, supporting a candidate or funds and is supporting that ad. So we created this tool called Ad Hoc. It is for those people who are familiar with Shazam. It's another app that allows you, when you're listening to a song on the radio, title. This is a very similar tool in the sense that we're using similar audio fingerprint technology. So it's an app. So you're watching TV and you see a television ad come on and you're like, what is this ad about? What you can do is you can turn on the app and you can identify the ad. So this middle pane here is when it's like actually listening to the ad. And then after 30 seconds or whatnot, it will pull for you the information from the database on who is actually funding and sponsoring that ad. And there's also a website for as well. So if you go to adhoc.sunlightfoundation.com, you can see the tool without just looking at the small telephone screen. And so what it does is, you'll have the ad and it'll pull the sponsor name. So now you know who is funding that ad and also what type of entity it is. And in this example, it's a super PAC. And it will pull you information such as independent expenditure. And this is also data that we have from the Influence Explorer tool that I was just showing off earlier and we talked about in the first of these webinar series. And also give you a quick summary of how much money is opposing or supporting this specific candidate. And it's a very, very insightful tool in the sense that it just really empowers you quickly as we, all go about our lives instead of really having to go out there and search and put in the title of the ad, but you don't know what it is. It really just empowers you to get that information quickly just in your phone. And the next tool that I want to show is another mobile tool, and I think it's pretty symbolic that a lot of these tools that we're talking about here today about really bringing data and how do you get campaign finance information to become relevant in people's lives. A lot of these tools are actually mobile tools because that's where people are. While a number of us, do spend a lot of time at work on our computers, a lot of times when you're going about your life, you really want that information easily accessible from your mobile device. So here's another tool that we have at Sunlight Foundation. It's called Zeitgeist. And it is another mobile app, and everything I just want to stress too at Sunlight, all of our apps and all of our tools that we've shown you in these past 3 webinars are all free and accessible to the public, and we make all of our data sources readily available because we really just want people to use the data and also build upon the information. So this next tool is called Zeitgeist, and what it does is provides you information about your surroundings. And unfortunately, the surroundings, in terms of the scope of this tool, is really in the U.S. We've always have lots of, especially when we have international guests, they're always very excited. And they're like, "Oh, does this work in my country, etc." And the answer, unfortunately, is no, because the data that we're pulling from in this tool comes from census and a number of other US-based data sources. So what this tool does is this gives you information about your surroundings. It gives you the age distribution, so what's the average age of the people in this neighborhood you're in. We sneak in there the political contributions because that's not necessarily information people are looking for a lot of times when they're trying to find out more information about their surroundings, but it's also information that's very insightful to know a little bit more, like does it swing more Democratic or Republican, etc. It also provides average rent prices. It's also linked in and hooked up with the Foursquare and Yelp API, so that you can see what are the popular spots where people have checked in this area, as well as what are the restaurants or movie theaters that people are going to. It also has how do people commute? Are they taking the public transportation? Do they drive? to the bike, etc. And also information about temperatures, what is the average high, what is it right now, as well as housing units over time. So how many homes have been built in this area? And so it's a really simple to use app. You just download it for free, and then it will geolocate your location. It'll ask, do you want to set this as your current location? And then you say yes, and then it will provide you with the information that I was talking about, and different panes. So you can see here just a couple of representations of how the app works. So you see the average age, you see the distribution from male and female. You also see the political contributions, as well as the Foursquare integration and the Yelp integration and the weather and temperature information that I mentioned earlier. And now the next tool I want to talk about, it's not necessarily, and the next two tools actually are not necessarily political finance related, but the functionality is meant to be, like I said earlier, inspirational and help you to think about what are the different ways you can connect with your constituents or other citizens in general. So this tool is called Journalism, and this is a really interesting and nifty tool, and actually the concept came over to us from the UK, and we've worked with them in terms of their using a technology to actually build this out here for the US. So whenever you're reading the news, and I think a lot of times we trust the news to be factually true, or that they're actually doing the investigative reporting necessary to generate that story that you're reading. And what journalism does is allows you to really empower you to just check on that to make sure that's actually the case. So what you can do is put in the URL of the story, or you can just type in, paste in the text, and it'll detect for you whether the story has been copied from press releases or from Wikipedia or from other resources. So what are the text similarities between the news article and other information that is on the web? So you can see here, this is an example. It's a bridge story in Maryland, and the right-hand side is a Wikipedia article about Chesapeake Bay Bridge. And the highlighted areas are the areas that actually match the two different sources. So you can see here, and it will pull for you exact text matches to give you a sense of like, this is where the information is matching word for word. And a lot of times it could be quotes, and that's understandable when you're quoting something, you want to actually use the original source. But other times it's just taking facts and just placing it over on the left-hand side. Or oftentimes it's just from press releases. So instead of actually going and writing the stories and doing the due diligence of checking on the information, they're just taking the information wholesale from the press release or the source and dumping it into the stories. And then a separate tool that we have, and also meant to be more inspirational, and this Open States is, I think, really meant to be more of a story in addition to the tool. It's a wonderful tool that we have, and it allows you to peruse legislative data from across all 50 states. And for folks who are familiar here in the U.S., the state governments have a very autonomous ability to legislate on the state level. So they have very, very disparate laws, oftentimes from state to state. But this resource allows you to put all of that information, to look up all of that information just one place. So you can find out more information about your bills or who your state representatives are. You can explore the voting patterns, and there's also an open API that is incredibly useful, especially since this is an example of information and data that's really just different and disparate and spread out across the 50 states. And the reason why I say this is more of a story is because it took us a really long time to build out this tool. And the reason why is because the information is everywhere. It's across the 50 states. And when I'm actually talking about the 50 states, I actually mean more than that, because each state have, oftentimes two state bodies. So there's an upper chamber and a lower chamber. And then within those, they actually manage the legislative information differently. So when we're saying 50 states, we're actually oftentimes sourcing the information from two different entities within each of those states. So there's just a lot of information, which is why it took us 5 years to really aggregate and put this together. And when I say we at Sunlight, I actually don't mean it's just us. Open States is really a symbol of a collaborative effort that we were able to do, working with the civic technologists, working with people on the ground from each state, because each state, if they're technologists or even folks who are working in policy, they know their state legislation much more than we do here in Washington, D.C. So this was really an opportunity for us to work with local advocates and local technologists to put all of this information together, to standardize this information, to make it easier for anyone from any other states to search and look up this data. So this is a really great example of, if you know there are information that is out there, but potentially, very, very difficult to get, really just enlisting the help of the people in those areas and working with them, because you're going to create and build a much better tool with more stakeholders involved. And then the next and last tool I really want to show here is actually a tool that's not Sunlight's. It is from a group called BizViz. You can find it at bizviz.com. And while it's not a Sunlight tool, they use one of our data sets, and we also worked with them as they were building out this tool, just providing some feedback and inspiration as well. And this is also an interesting tool, because the idea and the concept of this tool really came out of a film. So there were documentary filmmakers that made the movie called As Goes Janesville, that looks at a small community and their attempt at bidding for one of these big companies to come in to their town to provide more jobs, etc. And it is a corporate accountability app, and that's inspired by that, because during the process of creating the film, they realized that the city and the government were really just throwing everything out there in terms of subsidies, et cetera, to bring these companies to these places, but oftentimes they're giving them so much in terms of tax breaks that the community is not actually getting as much out of it. So it was a really, really interesting tool that they've developed to really empower citizens and individuals with more information. So it's more about consumer empowerment. And so this tool, I'm just going to show you now, allows you to, you're shopping. You can, either there's a camera built in this, so you can just take a picture of the logo of the company, etc. And I just pulled up here an example from Walmart. So you can look at each of these companies. You can see their tax rate, you can see the profits, you can also see the amount of taxes that they have paid, as well as how does that compare to other companies that are similar to them. Amazon, looks like here, does not pay nearly as much taxes as Walmart does, and it's in the red, or as much as the industry average, in which they should be paying. And then it also shows you the amounts of subsidies in which these companies received. And then lastly, it also pulls in the campaign finance data that is from Influence Explorer, and that powers a number of these different tools I have showed off already. So the idea of this is to really allow you to, when you're going about your day, shopping, going grocery shopping, etc., and making purchases that are a part of our everyday lives, to really empower you with a little bit more information. Do you really want to do business with these companies, considering their political affiliations, or considering the amount of subsidies and essentially the type of corporate welfare that the government provides by allowing them additional information or additional monies and subsidies to operate as a company? So these are just some examples of the different tools and resources that are powered by either our data or that we've built at Sunlight Foundation that really tries to inject the concept of making campaign finance data relevant to people on an everyday basis. So now I'm going to pass this back over to Peter.
Thank you, Amy. This is really amazing what you guys doing, and thanks so much for sharing it. And now I would like to also encourage everyone to just type your questions in the chat box, whether this is operational or anything which relates to these tools that Amy described. And now I would like to ask each one of you, besides the questions that I would like to ask you to put in the chat box, to just let's have a quick poll. We have two questions for you before we go to the next presentation. The first question is, would you buy products, services from a company which publicly supports a political party? So please say yes and no, and we will also broadcast the results. And the second question, do you think we can enforce governments to enforce disclosure of beneficial owners of a company? Please say yes or no. It's really exciting. So as you could see in the first question, 88% of you said that you would buy products and services from a company which publicly supports a political party. Even 3 of you said that you wouldn't buy. So it's a question whether those companies would provide financial support to a political party without disclosing that information. And looking at the second question, it shows that the majority of our audience thinks that we can actually achieve a change in terms of company registries, corporate registries, and to put pressure on governments to enforce disclosure of beneficial owners. Only 1 of you said that we don't have any chance to make this happen. I would be actually curious to see why. So if any of you said no, please, maybe that's Matthias. That is what I wanted to ask, to actually put a brief explanation in the chat box. Okay, that was very exciting. Thanks so much for giving your opinion on this. And now let's go back to the and now I would like to ask our special guest, Kamil, from Czech Republic, to introduce their platforms. Kamil?
So,
Kamil will talk about the reconstruction project.
Okay, we have the slides. So shall we begin? Okay, I take it as a yes. My name is Kamil Gregor. I'm from a Czech and Slovak parliamentary monitoring organization called Koho Volit. I will just now copy-paste the link to our organization to chat. So I would like to present the Reconstruction of the State project. It's basically an unprecedented movement of almost all major watchdog NGOs and many companies, media, experts, and other individuals coming together in the Czech Republic to advocate for 9 specific laws that would significantly reduce the level of state capture in the country. Just to give you a bit of political context, state capture and high-level political corruption is now among the most serious problems that the Czech Republic faces. For example, in the Corruption Perception Index, we score below countries like Botswana, Rwanda, or Qatar. The campaign is based on a pledge that MPs sign, and it contains a specific commitment to adopt the 9 anti-corruption laws within the current parliamentary term. And besides that, it of course involves very intensive expert lobbying by these organizations in the coalition and other activities. It started in March 2013, so we are now in the about 14 months in. In October, we actually had unexpected early parliamentary elections, so the campaign was essentially restarted because all the bill proposals had to be put into the legislative process again. But we used the elections to gain tremendous momentum and get the project into the public. For example, we delivered a voting advice newspapers that was ranking all MPs based on their voting about the anti-corruption bills to every household. It's several million households. It was very expensive, but very effective. Of it is in the legislative process. Probably the most important thing is that the reconstruction of the state became part of the official recognized government agenda. So now we have even stronger commitment from the government part of the parliament to adopt it. From the very beginning, we have tried to build a very strong brand, very positive and proactive brand. We tried not to be destructive or overly critical, which was itself something very innovative in the country. You can see pictures of some of the resources that we use. Apart from a landing page that you can very easily find online, we really try to be present even offline. So we organize events, conferences, workshops. We engage active citizens and MPs and civil servants. Obviously, our online presence is also strong. So this is an example of one of our YouTube videos. We really approach the project as any other professional marketing campaign. So the 9 laws are the product, and we try to use all the tools that are out there to sell it. This is a print screen of the landing page. You will find some basic information there in English as well. So let me just quickly copy paste the link to the chat. We have been building really large community of several hundred active citizens now, because the campaign has been based on personal communication with MPs. We want basically ordinary citizens to go to their MPs in their constituency and talk to them and basically try to talk them into adopting these 9 laws. And it's obviously very labor intensive. So we have been building a large network of people who not only engage with MPs, but also then help us organize events, for example. This is a slide about the budget, which is something that you might be interested in. It's very difficult to calculate it precisely because there are many members of the coalition who devote part of their time and resources to the project. But these are the figures that are taken from the official bank account. I would estimate that the actual costs are probably 2 to 3 times larger. But you can see that even if you take the higher US wages into account, the cost since last March was about $300,000 US dollars. And now let me just briefly comment on what's probably going to happen in the future. This is a print screen from the website. It shows you the progress of the 9 laws in the legislative process. One of them, as I said, was already adopted. It's number 4. We now know that all or almost all of the laws will be adopted in some way. And now we basically try to prevent MPs from watering them down. Now there are some serious efforts to change the bill proposals so that the laws would actually be adopted, but they would be very inefficient. So this is really now the focus of the advocacy campaign. So I think that's all from my presentation, and I will be looking forward to
very much, Camille. And yes, please do use the chat box and put your questions in there. And Amy will answer to your questions about replications, etc. So please type your questions, and we're going to make sure that all of them will be answered. Before I hand over back to Amy, I would like to ask all of you to answer a question as kind of a follow-up question of Camille's presentation. Do you think an anti-corruption pledge could work in your country? We can call it transparency pledge, etc. Beyond politicians are accepting it, of course, please also consider that whether you can also enforce the implementation of these pledges. So do you think an anti-corruption pledge could work in your country for politicians? This is an important. Thanks very much for your activity. It's very interesting to see the result. 68% of the participants said that yes. This is the optimistic part of the group, and we have around a third of the participants which said no, it wouldn't. If you said no, such a tool like a corruption pledge work. While you're typing in the chat box, I'm going to ask Amy to her presentation and introduce some more innovative projects, mostly local governments initiatives. Amy?
Sure. Thanks so much, Peter. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about local governments and just government in general, innovative is not a term that we would use to describe these groups, especially when it comes to campaign finance data, because I think there is just a very set way a lot of times it's also institutional. This is the information that we do or do not have, and this is the information that we do or do not share. So I just want to share two examples of local campaign finance boards that we believe are actually doing it right and actually doing it a little bit differently than what is just basically mandated. So an example here is with the New York City, their campaign finance board. They have a very, very, very robust searchable database of all of the campaign finance records in New York City. So you can just put in the cycle that you're interested in, and you can look at the recipient names, you can put in the organization, etc. And then additionally, what you can do is even go into the advanced search and put in even more specific detailed information about what you're looking for from either on a contribution avenue or through expenditures. I want to see how much they're spending or any other type of these transactions. And I just want to show an example of their results. And the results just look like lines of information, but the most important part of it that I want to stress, especially in this era of looking at campaign finance data, is, am I getting my arrow up? Is this top part. It allows you to download this information, not only just copy and paste this data that you see here, or not only just download this as a PDF, but it gives you the data in an Excel spreadsheet, or as a CSV file, so you can really manipulate the information and look for the specific details that you're looking for when you're looking at this type of data. So this is just an example of a campaign finance board locally that really is about transparency, that really is about making the information easy to use and available and accessible and searchable for anybody. You don't have to be a journalist to really understand, or a technologist to really understand the data that they're pushing out there. So that's one example I wanted to highlight. And then the next example I wanted to highlight is in Michigan. So in Michigan, they recently, I believe last year, launched and published a mobile app. a campaign finance app from the Secretary of State's office, where it allows you to look up the data and the information from the committees or the party affiliations of individuals or candidates, and it will provide you all of that information in an easy-to-use mobile app. And this is just something that most government entities are not doing. Never mind their campaign finance boards or the Secretary of State's office. So I can imagine this is something that would be incredibly useful if you are a citizen and you're at a town hall, or you're just trying to you're considering voting for a candidate, but you're not sure, and you just wanted to find out a little bit more about where and whom they're receiving financial support from. And I can imagine that these two tools would be very innovative and useful for people to access that information easily. So those are just the two additional ones that I wanted to show and just illustrate that it's not just here at Sunlight that we're doing these different and novel things, and that there's some government entities out there that are really trying to make their data more accessible as well. So giving that back to you, Peter.
Thanks very much. It was very interesting to see the responses in the chat box about the corruption pledge. Most of you said that the biggest problem is really the enforcement. So most of the politicians would sign such a pledge, but how can you enforce it? And I guess this is also a legal question and also a cultural and social question. So my question to all of you, to the participants, do you have any ideas, suggestions, or experiences for this type of enforcement? Maybe even social actions or communications, anything. Please type it in the chat box, or Camille, as our participant, he would maybe like to say something. Camille?
Yeah, hi. Just very briefly, well, our idea is, and we don't know whether this is going to work. We only experienced, as I said, the early elections. But the idea is that basically those who won't act upon the pledge will be voted out of their offices, right? We are basing this on experience from 2010 elections, where people, for many reasons, discovered for the first time in large numbers that they can use so-called preferential voting, so they can vote for individual candidates on party lists, and they can basically vote those people that were associated with corruption out of the parliament. And if we monitor the voting on the anti-corruption laws and then report on it, to sufficiently large number of voters, then the same effect would be repeated. I think it won't be necessary to do that eventually, because the politicians are still have the 2010 elections in mind, and they are very much afraid that it's going to happen again, that people will massively vote those who are told to be associated with corruption out of the parliament. So this is basically the biggest stick that we have, this idea that some politicians hopefully have, that they will be voted out of the parliament if they don't adopt these 9 laws.
Thank you, Camille, and I would like to encourage all of you to share your thoughts about this, and yet let's use this opportunity that we are together from all over the world, even in a virtual online space, to just list and brainstorm of some ideas how we can make it more effective, what kind of legal, social, or other actions are available. And of course, everything is really depending on the country context. And this is actually the question that I would like to ask from Amy. Looking at the questions at the chat box, most of the questions were about replication of these amazing Sunlight tools in a different context. Can you briefly share Sunlight's approach on replication and support to other organizations, and also what kind of mentoring and support you can give to other NGOs who would like to replicate your tool, or maybe use some elements of your tool?
Thing, Peter, and I think there are, definitely replication is incredibly important, and I think oftentimes, and the reason why we wanted to really even just have this webinar series is really also to inspire, because there are different data sets available in each country, and I know there are a couple of other very specific questions too, such as like, how do we, or how does the corporate accountability app upload the company information into the data set. So like, and for that, it's, and I think Sunlight takes a very different approach, and that's why that app really worked well with the group BizViz, because Sunlight for us is, we really strive to find complete data sets. So we work with things that we have all of the information for, and I think there are probably one or two outliers, one of them being one of the tools I showed during our last webinar on the party fundraisers, the political party time. That's when we don't have the complete data set, and there's no way we can ever get the complete data set, so we crowdsource that data. And so, and I say this so because BizViz did a really good job, because their goal wasn't to get all of the companies, which is what here at Sunlight we would like to do. Their goal was to really just empower people who are going out there to buy things. And there are, unfortunately or fortunately, in the US, a handful of companies that pretty much make everything. So if you're looking for like chips, oftentimes is Frito-Lay. It could be a number of different brands, but it's Frito-Lay is going to be the main company. Or if you're buying like soap or shampoo, it's going to be Johnson & Johnson or Procter & Gamble, etc. So it makes it a little bit easier if you're looking at just the use cases. So instead of just looking at all of the companies in that create and things that we all buy, just looking at the main ones that are creating, that people are purchasing from. And then so they started up with a very narrow, they were like, these are 500 companies or products that we know people buy, and we're going to make sure that the information that we have for these 500 are complete, and we have it for all of the different data sets, and they got their data set from a variety of different resources. Subsidies information was from the government, and a lot of times it's even just aggregating the local subsidies and the federal subsidies and whatnot. And then our data set was from the Influence Explorer data set. And then they put it all together for those specific 500 companies that they know people are very familiar with the brand name and very familiar with the product, and made that information available. And they also use, as I said earlier, technology allows them to do logo recognition, so you can take a photo of the specific logo and it will match that database. And if you're taking a logo of something that's not in the database, it'll actually just send that file over, and a human, one of the developers will look at it and be like, oh, this is actually what this is. It's soap, or this is a brand, it's Dove, etc. And then they'll manually enter that information in. So it was a really great way of not only providing a resource out there, but using some of the feedback and that information to help generate and populate the rest of the information that they didn't already have.
Just to add a couple of things to what Amy said. Hi guys, this is Julia. We do have an international program, which means that we work with people in other countries. Some of our tools, and it doesn't only include the tools that we're talking in this webinar series, but also other kinds of tools that are not related to political finance transparency. So some of them are replicable. Most of them aren't replicable in one. And it's because of a lot of different reasons. As Amy said, data is not necessarily available in other countries. There are other jurisdictional differences, legislative differences that make it sometimes even impossible to replicate tools like Influence Explorer. But journalism, polygraph, and ad hoc are some of the examples that could work in other contexts. Especially journalism, we know, because this is originally not a Sunlight developed tool either. That said, we through our international program focus more on giving specific advice. So if you guys, for example, decide to work on a project or a tool that is similar to journalism or ad hoc or polygraph or even influence explorer, or you do have elections coming up and you want to experiment with something that is similar to influence explorer that probably uses different kinds of data, please contact us. You can shoot me an email, you can go through our websites, and contact us through our international page or our major contact email addresses. We're really happy to give you specific advice on what kind of technology could be deployed in your own context. That said, we won't be able to decide without taking a look at the actual jurisdictional differences. Another question that I wanted to give a very short answer to was, I think, from Matthias, asking about case stories. Yeah, is there a collection of good practices for party finance regulation, cases that actually work? So I just wanted to raise your attention that Global Integrity, the Electoral Integrity Program, and Sunlight just started a big project around political finance transparency called the Money, Politics and Transparency Project, which is a big research and community building effort that tries to indeed collect those case stories and take a look at countries where actually we have good case stories from. So I strongly encourage everyone to keep an eye on that project too, if you're interested in toolkits and guidelines and case stories that might support your work. At the end of this project, we will probably try to craft some guidelines, recommendations, principles that could be applicable in almost all contexts. So we're pretty much aware that the context is different for each country. Still, in our experience, we can create some basic guidelines, some basic recommendations, some basic points that work everywhere. We did that with the Parliamentary Monitoring Network that created the Declaration of Parliamentary Openness. We have a draft guideline on lobbyist disclosure. We also have a draft guideline on procurement disclosure. So there is a tendency in this community to come up with tangible recommendations and principles that work everywhere. And that said, I'm giving the floor back to Peter.
I think he's not here. He's not in the room.
Comes back, we're just going to take a look at your questions now. Give us, I don't know, 30 seconds, and we will pick a few that we could answer. In the meanwhile, I strongly encourage our previous guest speakers. I know David Cabo from CVO is here. We have Rosario. We have Matthias, who's really active. Georgi, please take a look at the questions, and if you feel like any of those are for you, just feel free to answer them.
Yeah, and I know, like, reading through some of the questions as well, that there is the sense of, like, we can't even start to think about how to do it for our country. And I think folks from Venezuela and Mozambique both had said that. And I think, like, that's exactly why these are really meant to inspire and then not not for you to exactly go out there and do that, and know that, and a lot of times it's to know that the technology out there exists. And this is, following up from Peter's question and Julia's response, like even knowing what types of technical resources, whether that is text matching for our journalism one, whether that is a crowdsourcing for you to like aggregate that information, etc. So like, and those are things that if you guys are interested in a specific tool, or just finding out what are the mechanics behind it, feel free to shoot myself or Julia an email, and we can connect you with the developers that worked on it to see if that's something that's possible and in your home country. So, and I just really want to stress that we're not expecting you guys to create an influence explorer, but maybe something like that I showed last time on party time, if that I was talking about earlier for the fundraisers, if there are specific things that you guys know that people can gather that information for you. I think Martinez mentioned earlier in her comment that like you guys can mark the ads is that in Hungary?
Yeah.
Hungary. So because if you have a TV that's controlled, that's state control, government control, I'm sure the numbers that they're providing and putting out there are not necessarily accurate, or even if they're accurate, you probably want an NGO to provide an accounting of that information. And that's something that people can do. Like you can even see how often those different ads run and get crowdsourced information. Are there specific time slots that each parties are interested in advertising on or at? And that's some information that you guys can probably start to piece together to develop a database. And then really using that concept of like, you're not going to be able to provide everything that's out there, but you're going to provide and clean up some of that information, and then really rely on, either your constituents or your activists and your supporters to provide some of that, or just regular users. They're going out there and they're using this tool and they're like, hey, this information is incorrect, or hey, you can add more to this data set. And that's a really important way to think about. It's not just us that's in it, because there's no way, even like Sunlight, for those who are familiar with us, we're not a small organization. There's still no way that we can do all of the work that we do without relying on other technologists and people who just really believe in government transparency and political finance transparency. And journalists are a very, very important constituent group to think about, because they need that information to write the stories. So there's no way we can do this on our own without sort of the support from the people on the ground who are doing this on a daily basis.
I typed in the link for the Hungarian campaign that Amy referred to. It is Képmutatás, the HU, which is hypocrisy in Hungarian, and that's a project of several Hungarian NGOs who try to monitor the election, or tried to, because the elections are over, monitor the election spending through crowdsourcing, monitoring the billboards, the political ads on TV, and try to estimate how much they could have cost, and then compared it to the official spending reports, which is not hard data at all, but it's a very good way of sort of showing how inadequate those party or election reports are. And another example or another project idea that K-Monitoring Hungary had, and that's something that is relevant to what Matthias is talking about, is about media ownership. And if you have reliable company register information, you can, and also if you can crowdsource that kind of information, which is something that CVO in Spain does, for example, trying to figure out who knows who and what are the real connections between big business people and politicians. That also gives you a good picture of how the media is controlled in your country, and combining that with journalism and trying to sort of figure out how much your media outlets are influenced by those business people could be a very powerful tool that probably doesn't target journalists as much as it targets other citizens. So in this case, journalists as an intermediary group might not work that well because they are exactly the folks we're talking about. But I guess it could be a really powerful tool, though we haven't seen such a combination anywhere in the world. So we're arriving to the end of our webinar series, and we have a lot of comments and a lot of questions. Peter is back. Okay, I can see Peter is back now. Peter, if you have any questions left or anything that you wanted to say, yeah, feel free to ask it now. But I guess we should wrap up and encourage. I mean, I'm encouraging everyone to send your questions to us directly if you have any questions, or if you have a project idea, or if you want to work with us, just shoot us an email and we will answer you. Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone